Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Wild Woman Podcast. I have a lovely guest with me today. Well, they're always lovely, and I know I say that every time because it's true. But I've the lovely Mary Farrelly with me and I love the name of her business, The Dog Knows. I just love it. So we're going to find out exactly what the dog knows today, and we don't know. But yeah, a beautiful name. And I met Mary at, I suppose, a sort of women's empowerment book launch event in Ireland a few months back. And I just felt a very strong connection with her when I met her. And I just enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, from there, really, this has just sort of evolved into our conversation today. And we've been having a lovely chat before we came on air. And I sort of think that's sort of that's sort of flowing into the conversation I think we'll have today. But it's just lovely, these synchronicities, and how I just trust these conversations are what um are meant to be, and what's meant to be shared is meant to be shared and heard. So I hope everyone listening enjoys this conversation with Mary. So firstly, welcome, Mary. Really lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here.
Oh, good. And you're from, I didn't say, but you said near Slane is the broad. I think a lot of people can relate. Well, definitely in Ireland, to Slane has been an area of many concerts and
Exactly.
there's a lot of lovely sites and sacred sites around Slane as well, isn't there, in the almost the
Yeah.
centre of Ireland?
Yeah. So Meads, you're right. Like there
Meath,
would be
yeah.
a lot of things like Newgrange and the Hill of
Mm.
Tara, and so it's a beautiful place to live.
Yeah. And are you from there, Mary? Just curious, yeah.
Well, with this accent, not exactly.
Yes, well, that's true. I knew. I said that to you. I should
Uh,
know that.
but from a hat perspective, yes, I absolutely am from here. So my mother would have been from Meath. My father was from Monaghan. But I grew up in the UK, so I was in the UK for many, many years. Never lost the accent, but even as a child, just always wanted to live in Meath. I just always knew I would. I tried several times to get over to live with granny or an uncle or aunt or whoever would take me, but my mother wasn't just willing to let go at that stage.
What was that, do you think? What was that calling in you at such a young age?
Yeah, it was just something I was always very aware of. And it's even now, it would be very hard to explain. And I've kind of never really tried to dwell on it, I suppose, to answer that question. It was a knowing. That's
Mm.
all I can say. It was just a knowing. And for me, we used to come over to my grandmother every year for the summer holidays. My mother used to drop us over, head back to England. She worked, and we'd stay here for the whole summer holidays. And I think for me, again, I just felt I belonged here and I was accepted here. And it was a sense of freedom and space and all of those things. I grew up in the city in the UK, so I found it very refreshing to just be me here. I couldn't be that in England, funnily enough.
Isn't that amazing? It's like, isn't it? It sounds almost like I just had this conversation actually with a young girl in the coffee shop this morning. She was speaking a bit of Irish, and I'd never heard anyone in this particular coffee shop. And she said, "Oh no, I'm really trying to. There's so many people, young people learning it again." And I said, "Gosh, yeah, it's lovely, isn't it?" And I said a few words, and we were talking about. She said, "Oh, it's just beautiful. I feel alive when I speak it." It was like she'd never, even though she went to school here. And I was saying it feels like it's almost, I think when a language is so much a part of us, and I don't know why I'm gone on to this now, but it sort of relates to what you're saying. It's sort of part of our culture and our DNA, and it's almost when you're deprived of that. I actually have found myself talking about that recently, about the limitations of language sometimes I find. And the Irish language has a beauty and just words that even saying Gura Mila Mahagat or Gura Mahagat, thank you. And it's like maybe there be 1,000 blessings on you. Like it's spoken in such a beautiful, poetic way. So I suppose my point is that they're sort of nearly like what you described, an inner knowing. Like the way she spoke about it, I was really taken with. She just said, "Oh, I just feel so alive when I speak it." So It sounds like there was a reconnection there for you as a
Yeah.
child. And I just find that really interesting. Your business is called The Dog Knows, and you started talking about this inner knowing in you.
Yeah, that's funny. And even listening to you speaking about that, and obviously I'm not going to attempt to speak in Irish with this accent. It just doesn't sound the same at all. But I love to hear that Irish word spoken. I just love it. I think it's harmonious. It's, you
Yes.
know, it flows so beautifully. And like you said, I think with the Irish language, there is such beauty around the translation of it, you know, when we get to understand that. So yeah, I'd probably always be a little bit resentful that I never learned to speak Irish, but
Oh, there's always time.
there's always
I'm
time.
only coming back to it, and there's a poetry, but there's an expression. Yeah, I just feel, and when you talked about the freedom and the space, when I heard it again this morning and I started saying a few words, I actually did feel something come alive in me. It's amazing. And I think that's why it's very, I'd love to get into, yeah, maybe just a little bit of the story where it led you to now, but straight away when I met you, what struck me as well was how, and when you talked about the dogs and animals and nature, it's like it feels like to me they're very much about reminding us of who we truly are and that inner knowing and inner instinct that they possess. I'm only beginning to sort of, I suppose, as you awaken to it in yourself, I suppose you then can awaken to it in others and sort of connect on a level maybe I wouldn't have in the past. Well, so was there always that connection with animals and dogs or in your life?
Yeah, well, I think as we speak, it's very clear to me that it's all related. So our conversation is just leading beautifully into itself, because part of that coming home, as it felt like to me, coming to Ireland, even as you know, even as long as I can remember as a child, I felt like I was coming home. I could feel the energy change as the plane come in over the country. I'd look down at the trees and I just feel this sense of something. I can't explain it. And you know yourself, when you talk like this, sometimes people think you're absolutely bonkers. That's okay.
Less so.
Probably we are a
It's
little bit
okay.
anyway, so that's okay. But for me, I would have grown up to be classed as a very shy, quiet child. So it was a struggle. And I suppose maybe that was more difficult in England, you know, where you kind of just got lost. You got lost
Mm.
in the buzz and the crowd. And even now when I go to the UK, and I love to go to visit, you know, because a part of me spent a considerable length of time there. And I have family over there now as well. But I feel the energy change. It's like a fast pace, it's furious. I just feel like everything's rushing towards me when I'm over there. And I don't feel like that here. But for me, the beauty was I could be quiet in nature and just enjoy it and embrace it. And my granny would have had a small farm holding. She would have had a big family, and her husband, you know, passed away when they were quite young, really. So she was left, as many women were at that stage, to rear a large family and survive. So I learned a lot from her. You know, I learned that life was tough, but even in the toughest times, there could be kindness. And she showed that to me, you know, every single day that I spent with her, even though life was tough. You know, it could be in the little arm around you, the little bit of encouragement, but for me, it was probably in things like the trust to let me go out and just explore and be free and to experience and to do all of those things, and then to come home to a safe place where the fire was lit. You know, she was baking the bread, the bit of bread was
Oh
put
my
on the
God.
table.
That sounds so.
But I felt that
Mm.
as a child, you know, that
Mm.
was love. I felt love in that way as a child. So it was really beautiful. But of course, I was surrounded by animals. And I used to just sit in their company. And for me, you know, as that shy, quiet child, and that probably isn't the truth, as I've discovered as I've got older, that it wasn't shyness. There was other things that was keeping me quiet in life. But I would sit with the hens and I would chat away to them, or I would sit in the, you know, in the cow sheds. They used to have the wall for milking, and I'd sit on the wall and I just talk to the cows as they were being milked. And it was that sense of, just be who you are. There was no judgment. There was trust. They listened to me. I could say whatever I wanted to say. And they had such a calming, beautiful effect on me. But one of the biggest impacts was a little black and white collie that was actually my cousin's. But I remember my grandmother coming and saying, my mother dropped us off and she's like, come here, I want you to meet someone. I know you love them. So she took me again, the arm around, wiped her, hands on her apron as she took me, as she was covered in the flour. She was always baking bread, this woman, always. But she took me outside and there was this beautiful little black and white collie, a very small black and white collie, and it was called Niggy. And she just left me sitting with this dog, and I sat for hours and hours. But this was the old Ireland as well, remember, where animals were simply animals. But she still understood that I found something special in that place with that animal. Even though, to her, animals were food on the table, it was about survival and all of those things. And dogs had jobs to do and all of those things. But she got it. She knew that I needed that, or she sensed it, or whatever it was. So she just left me with this little dog. But that little dog, I felt, looked into my soul, and I into it, and that was the start of my love with dogs. That's
So beautiful. Oh, you just paint such a, and I know it is, it's just you have a beautiful way with words and how you describe it. I can just, it's like sitting and, on the couch and curling up with the book, and it's like the story you're telling. It's like, oh my God, that's just so touching, even though I know, you know, times were hard too. But I love what you say about being tough, but there's also space for kindness. It just, when you say that, that sense, I'm hearing it more from people, this sort of paradox we nearly have to live with all the time. This is the nature of reality. Nothing is one thing or another. I don't know why I'm going on to that, but it just struck me when you said it, this very, because I think we're in this world now where everything's either black or white, or we're sort of being siloed into it's this or it's this or it's this or it's this. And even what you described there is just everything was okay as it is. There isn't, it's, you have to be this way or this way. You could just be. And I just feel that's very much where we're being, let's say, called, or I more people I meet, it's like we're nearly having enough of this. This has gone into another topic, but I think it's all connected, this one way or the other, or this black or this white, or this division, that there is space for all of it. And how more people, it's like things have to become more divisive for us to go, no, this isn't who we are and this isn't what we want. And that the animal seeing you and the dog was just able, you were able to connect and just see each other as you are. I don't
yeah.
know, that sounds a very,
No,
gone
no, it
around in a
doesn't.
big
I
circle,
no,
but
I hear what you're saying.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think you're right. I think we're in
Mm.
this crazy world that everything does have to fit into a box, or so we're told. But the question is, does it really? Does it really? And I don't believe it does. So I suppose then from that, I've gone back to that experience a lot, because it's at the soul of what the dog knows is about, really. So it inspired me, and I don't know if you'd like me to just share where
I'd
that
love,
came from, Celine, because
yes,
it's
please, I would.
relevant. So
Mm.
I had worked in different sectors, and like as I got older, obviously the way life was, working with dogs at that time wouldn't have been considered to be a job, or there would have been, no income in that, or survival. It wouldn't have been seen as a worthy career, unless you were to be a vet or something like that. And that wasn't of interest to me. So I went off and I tried different things, and I worked in different sectors, and I've had amazing experiences. But I can see now, as I'm reaching the age that I'm reaching, looking back, that everything is relevant. Everything is relevant. So, I started, my first job ever was in a factory with my mother in the UK. It was a summer job, and I stayed there. And you could look at that and say, oh, it's just a factory job. But oh my gosh, I learned so much there. I learned about people there. I learned about ordinary people who were good at heart, who were kind, who supported each other, who helped each other out. You know, we shared, we kind of worked on the hard things together. There was teamwork. So I learned a lot working in that factory. And that was with people who, you know, had to work hard for a living, who maybe didn't have a lot of money at the time, who were in survival mode all the time. But again, in the hardship, there was true kindness, you know, there was true compassion and all of those things. So those patterns have repeated. You know, if we look, these patterns will repeat. And then I went, when I came over here, I also started in the factory because I had no confidence whatsoever when I first came over here. I was still that, you know, that quiet girl who couldn't even make eye contact with somebody at that time. It was a real struggle for me. And that's
What
when
age were you, Mary? Sorry, when you came
I
over
was in my
here.
20s at this
Okay, you
stage.
moved
So,
over here then when in your
yeah, I
20s.
was in my 20s. So I was 25 when I moved over here. Which is, you know, an adult in all sense of it, but I never felt like an adult. I still felt, you know,
A
inadequate
brave
and
move, though.
nobody.
Sorry, at the same time, it was a brave move to make to come to.
Yeah, well, I think again, something inside me, you know, urged me to do that. It was what I needed to do. I think I always felt that to get the life that I wanted to live. But, you know, it brought me on lots of different experiences. And I started working then within the disability services, and then I worked in the early years sector, and then I worked in community development. And to me, they all tie so beautiful. And then I went into training and education, and they still all tie so beautiful because one experience led me to another, to another. But each of those along the way, I was like, who am I? Who am I to do this? Who am I to do this? But slowly, you know, I started to trust again and believe in myself, and that confidence grew a little bit. And again, I'm so thankful now looking back at the experiences I had because they've given me a lot of knowledge and they've given me a lot of skills. But all of those skills and knowledge tie into who I am at heart, which is what's really, really nice. But what I discovered then was I thought I wanted to be something, but that wasn't what I wanted. This is what we do, isn't it? We have to
Mm.
explore and to find out. But I did go into business with a businesswoman from the UK, actually. So I was here and she was there. And now she was a really savvy businesswoman, but it didn't work out between us. And for me, it ended very badly. So I was very burnt at that stage. And so all of those old insecurities that I'd worked so hard to push through suddenly all flooded back up for a while, just for a little while. But on the back of that incident, I was working in a hot desk a facility, you know, where you have the hot desks where you can just
Mm.
rent a space. And there was an amazing guy behind me who was into techie stuff. And he saw me coming out of this call when it all ended, and he saw that I was upset, but trying to hold it all together. You know, when someone is nice to you and you're just trying to hold it all together. But that's what happened. He was
I'm
being
trying to
really
be
nice.
tough, and you're being
Yeah,
kind, and
yeah,
you're
he
going
was
to make me.
really nice, and I was thinking, please don't be nice to me because I'm just going to crumble here. Because I was trying to be a savvy businesswoman, which I wasn't. You know, I wasn't feeling any of this. So we went for a coffee, and in that conversation, he just had a real depth to him, this man. I'd love at some stage to find him and thank him. And I do hope that happens at some point. I don't know that he realized the effect that he had on me with his words at that time, but he sat me down and he said, okay, this is going to be tough for a little while. But he said, you will get through it, even though you may not believe that now, but you will get through it. And then he said to me, what did you love when you were younger? And I'm like bawling, Celine, just tears everywhere. You know, it wasn't a pretty sight at all. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. And he said, you do know. He said, deep inside, you do know. And that quieted me straight away when he said that, because he called me out, basically. He's like, you
Mm.
know, he really put it to me. I was like, I don't know though. And he says, well, what, as a child, what brought you happiness? What did you enjoy doing? I was thinking, this is stupid. Like, well, here I am in bits like this,
Talking
everything's
about your
failing on
business
me. And
going.
he's asking me, what do I like? And I said something like, well, I loved coloring, but I'm no artist. And I probably said it like that. Well, I love coloring, but I'm no artist, because there was a little bit of anger there as well. And he said, what else? And I said, animals. I said I loved animals. And I think that was probably the first time in my life I ever sort of said it out loud in a way that could mean anything other than, you know, I just love animals. Like, and he's like, okay, he says, so sit with it. He says, go off and take time to recover, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I went off and I listened, though, to what he said. And I allowed myself a wallow month. I was very generous. I gave myself a full month. But I had set a date
I think
that
that was quite hard on yourself. You could give yourself another few months.
But after
The
that
wallow.
date, I said, you have to pick yourself up off the ground, because this is not where you need to stay. You know, you don't want to go back to where you were before. So I said, okay, what are you going to do? I don't know. So I decided that I would go and volunteer for something, just something to get me out of the house and back in connection with the world, because it would have been very easy to curl up and to not come back out again. It would have been very easy to do that. So I went volunteering, and I applied for a volunteer position with a community radio station over Dublin direction, thinking that it would be doing a little bit of research, making the calls for them and all of this stuff. And they said, no, we want you to do your own little show. And I was like, no way, that won't ever, never would I be doing that. 3 weeks later, I was doing my own little show on this
Wow, that's
community.
incredible.
But I loved it. I loved it. And I was like, I don't understand what's going on here. How can Mary, this little shy person that, you know, how can, but I loved it because it allowed me an opportunity to present opportunities to others. And that was really important. It allowed me to let people's voice be heard. Does that make sense?
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
I could relate to that because my voice had never been heard. So for me, this was the magic, something I would never have thought of. So I stayed in that for, I think, 6 or 7 months. Loved every single second of it. Absolutely adored it. And then out of nowhere, but it was voluntary, so it wasn't going to pay me a wage. But out of nowhere, this little ad came up on Facebook for, would you like to work with children and animals? And I was like, ping, what is that? I'm like, what do they mean work with children and animals? I love both of those, like, so it's just bonkers. So I explored that, and I was introduced to an amazing lady in Northern Ireland who had set up, it was like, no, it wasn't, but it was very similar to a franchise type business. So she wanted to empower and support women to build something for themselves. So that was how I started off. I went down to have a look. She was running these little dog training classes for children with their pet dog. And that's how I started. And that business was called Little Paws. Okay, so that was the name. So I was Little Paws Meath, and then she was setting up around the country. But so I
And when
started.
was this, Mary? How
This
long
was
ago?
back around 2003, 4, something
Okay,
like that.
okay. Quite a while back, yeah. Yeah.
So that was fantastic. Went along doing that for a good few years and enjoyed it. But what I discovered there was, there's so much more to this. This is so much more valuable than just an activity for a child with their dog. And what my focus was, I saw the shy, quiet child coming in with a dog who was timid, who had no voice, who couldn't mix with the other children, who was isolated, who didn't like sports, so they had nothing else. And I was like, this is what it's about for me. This is where I can support, you know, my childhood through, you know, this, like the mini me's, the other me's out there, because there's always many of each of us, right?
Yeah. Like the you that didn't get that maybe as a child, or well, you did, I suppose, it in the farm with your aunt,
but I
but
could
still,
see it. I could,
yes.
it was empathy, and I could feel for those children that, you know, that's struggle. I understood what struggle was. I understood how hard it was to face the world and all of those things. So also in the middle of this, then adults had said, well, we want to work with our dogs in a different way as well. So a few adults, not every adults, because still in many places dogs are seen to be trained, to be dominated, and that's not what I'm about at all. And actually, it's the opposite of that. I want to change that. I want to spin it on its head. Like you said, it doesn't have to be black and white. There's so much more that can be learned from this. But with the children, what I saw was it was a great opportunity to not only build their confidence and let them feel seen, but also to teach them communication skills with their dog, their little best friend. But those communication skills are then going to carry them through life, because with our dog, we learn about empathy and kindness and trust and understanding and all of those things. So I'm like, this is where we can create something special. So in a way, the dog is benefiting from this because it's having a beautiful relationship built with its human, or humans if it's a family. But the child is building all these skills for life. That child is going to be an adult someday, and wouldn't it be fantastic if they had this empathy inside them that they can transfer then to the rest of their life, to everybody they meet, be it a human or be it an animal. It doesn't really matter. So the dog really, for me, is the conduit to supporting the child as well.
Beautiful.
But it's also giving the dog a voice as well. Does that make sense? Like,
yes,
it's giving that dog a voice. It's like, treat me with kindness, don't be cruel to me, love me, meet my basic needs and more, if that's possible.
yeah. And what do you from your experience with dogs, and I know every dog is different like a human, what is it that they're most, I mean, I know love, but like what is the most, could you say, important thing that we can offer a dog, if we, whether we own one or meet one or
Well, all of those things like love, but definitely understanding. There is actually the way we have a hierarchy of needs. There is a hierarchy of needs for dogs out there as well, and as there should be, because a dog is a living being. It has needs and it has feelings and emotions. Now, I don't confuse the two. We're a different species, so. I know many people, we love dogs and we're like, oh, they think on the same level. I don't know that I believe that. I believe the dog should be respected as a dog in its own right. Okay, so its needs meant, but the same needs. Start with the basic needs: safety, warmth, a roof over its head, food in its belly, not living in fear. Like, start with the same basics that we start with, and then we can build on those. But we have to meet those basic needs first, the same as we need to have them. There's no point throwing education at us if we don't have food in our belly. If we feel afraid at night, we've nowhere safe to sleep. We need to work through those levels.
Yeah, isn't it? Because you said something before about survival, and it strikes me whether we're humans or animals, once we're in, that is the first, this sort of survival instinct, but it can often end up staying with us longer than maybe, depending, I've noticed that even in myself throughout the years, where you can develop this sort of belief around I'm not safe because maybe at one time you weren't safe, and that can sort of limit you. Like when you talk, that brings me even just, sorry, back, because it struck me as you were speaking about your own life and how all of these experiences, they say, I think it's Wayne Dyer who says that no experience is wasted. I always loved Wayne Dyer. And he wrote about it in a beautiful book, I Can See Clearly Now, later in his life. I'm sure you know, and it's just a beautiful, I found it when I was feeling lost. It's a beautiful read if you are, knowing that nothing is by accident. But it still strikes me, despite you saying you were very quiet and timid as a child, that you were brave, because you seem to be very connected to that inner knowing. Like you said it at the very beginning, that you followed all of these things. You saw the ad in the paper, you went onto the community radio. Like,
Yeah,
how did that all, that was obviously
or
a
you
real
could say Batty, as I'm sure my poor husband thinks. No, for me, I think, look, I think all of our upbringings give us something, don't they? Whatever they were, whatever that is. and we at some point make a choice as to how we take that experience and how we use it. So for me, without going into it too much, Celine, like life was tough for us as as children growing up in our home life. It was quite tough, as it has been for many, many people. But within that toughness, I think that nurtured my, I suppose, independence, or more than that, for me, it was a belief that there has to be something better than this. As a young child, that's what I always believed. There has to be something better than this. Life has to be for a reason. There's something behind that. Otherwise, why? Well, what's the point of anything? So I suppose that belief, even in a very young mind, was a driving force for me. And there was always, I suppose, like maybe a hidden request that if I could have the opportunity to experience this, I would embrace it. That was kind of the deal I made with myself, even as a young child. So I was always quite perceptive, I suppose. But probably from part of the reason that you said, like safety was important. So I had to learn as a young child to survive, I suppose. Yeah, does that make sense? So I had
Yes.
to
Yeah.
learn to
Yeah.
survive.
Yeah.
And that probably brought to the front a lot of that emotional stuff. Yeah, that kind of empathy and seeing like I have a really strong sense of justice, as in I just cannot. Now it wouldn't, and funnily, this also comes from, I suppose, growing up as well. If I saw someone else being unfairly dealt with, I would probably react greatly to that. Whereas for many years, if that was to me, I wouldn't, because I
Mm.
accepted that that was my lot. Not anymore, but I did for a long time. Does that make sense? But
Mm.
what it did was bring out that kind of, I think I use it on my website, the phrase, I will always stand up for the underdog, because that is not right. It is not right that somebody has to be under anybody else. I can't take that at all. So it all ties in with, be it a dog or be it a human, it doesn't really matter. Once something has feeling and emotion, what right has somebody else to dominate that, or to mistreat, or to abuse, or to use, or any of those things, or even just to not be nice to?
Yeah.
Just
And what you describe as well, to me, the key to a lot of what you're saying there's two things. Firstly, as a child, it strikes me, as you said, that sort of sense of being self-reliant, and there has to be something better than this. I've heard other people who've maybe come from, and I know tough upbringings can show itself in so many different ways that often many of us don't see, can appear lovely and aren't. And so it can be financially, it can be emotionally, physically, but that when that happens, it can sort of, the opposite is not out now often said of younger people being mollycoddled, and then they grow up and they don't know how to find their way. And
yeah.
I suppose, look, we all have different experiences. So it just strikes me, yeah, that has been, I suppose, a very important part of you finding your way, that sort of that same thing, that everything happens nearly for a reason, that gave you that sort of fire to go, okay, I am going to find a better life than this, and I am going to, and giving you the empathy for those who maybe, as you said, are the underdog. It just yeah, like it's really, but it also strikes me in doing that you have to be, what you said, in knowing that everything is sentient, animals, people, and that empathy, that we have to connect. And I think this is partly what is missing in our world right now, and I hope is coming back, is we have to be able to feel the depth of our own feelings and really connect with ourselves to be able to connect with others and animals and nature. Um, and we're nearly in an epidemic of numbness or disconnection. How do you see all of that now?
Well, I find it a very interesting time. I find it's like there's two sides now at the minute, and they're both very strong. It's like a battle going on at the minute. This is just my version of things, right? But it is, that's what I sense. And we need to be strong in this time, and we need to stand up for what is right, and we need to speak. We need to voice things. This is not a time anymore for pushing things under the carpet and that, because there is another side there that is very strong also at this moment. And if we don't stand up, if we don't speak out, if we don't hold strong, we're at risk of getting buried again. You know, we're at risk of going under, and that's not a very it's not a very pretty thing to think about, is it? It's
No,
like
no,
that world, you know, that is a possibility at this moment. All we have to
yeah.
do is turn on the news or read a paper.
No, don't do that.
Oh, no, don't do that. But that's all
That's
we
been
have
my
to do.
advice to my life changed when I
But it
stopped
is
doing that.
there, so
Yeah,
we
yeah,
can't totally ignore it
yeah,
either. But
yeah.
what we've also, or in my experience, and we kind of touched on this just when we spoke just before, is that there is an amazing amount of beautiful, strong people out there, and you know, with such a light in them, that so it shows me that all is not lost, because you could easily turn on the telly and say, oh my god, all is lost, all is lost. But it isn't if we just open our minds a little. And that too ties in with what I am. So I'm classed as a dog trainer. I'm not a dog trainer. I don't want to
Mm,
train dogs. I don't want
mm,
to do that. Train them
mm,
for what? You know, can they
mm.
not just be a dog?
No. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But what I do want to do is build beautiful relationships, be that between people and people or people and animals. It doesn't matter to me. I really don't care, because we all impact on each other in such a way anyhow. But I also can see that if we look at the animals around us and the life, you know, that an animal lives, is like you mentioned, a basic one. Do we have to have such complicated lives? Do we have to have so many tokenistic things in our life? Can we not live simple and just take what we need, and you know, just be nice to the person sat next to us, and you know, not living in judgment all the time, or trying to be better than or the same as somebody else. And you know, I see these stories all the time. I was part of a conversation recently in a group, and it's relevant in an abstract kind of way, but the conversation was about how in business, many businesses, we have so many influencers out there now, yeah, on social media, but so many businesses give, give to the influencers in the hope that that influencer will mention them. Okay, now I get it. I get how that works. But something doesn't sit right with me at the core of that. Like, you could have somebody there who spends every single penny they have on you because they want to support you, because they care about you, because they love you, because they want to see you succeed. And we might not even blink at that person. Does that make sense? It's like we
Mm,
need to wake up and kind of see, what do we really need in this world? But with our children and dogs, if we start with our children for anything, for any life
mm,
lessons, if we start with the young child, we can show them a beautiful way. We can, you know, show them the opportunities. We can build the skills with them to create a more even, just nicer world, like
mm.
less
Yeah.
complicated. Life is way too complicated now.
Yeah. Do you know when it sort of strikes me as well when you say it, and even going back to the beginning of you as this quiet child and sort of maybe not feeling enough, and you met the dog, and it strikes me that a lot of what is going on in the world now is because we've sort of been conditioned or reared our systems to believe we aren't enough. Do you know what I mean? And to me, it's like we're returning, and that is why there is so much judgment and fear and division, because as long as, I can say you're wrong, well, then I can feel better about myself. And I've seen that more in my own life when my fears arise. I sort of have to look at them and go, what is that about? Like, what is it you're And it always comes back. And I was reminded by a woman I spoke to as well of that everything comes back to a lack really of self-worth, you know. And if you think of us coming into the world, it just was so clear. Every system tells us, whether it's the education system, you have to get all these letters after your name to be of value. Financially, you're not worth anything until you start contributing to society and slogging away. You know, everything is chipping away. And so, what you've described there with the dog, you know, you just in that looking into his eyes and him looking at you, and just this sort of sense of, I am enough. It seems like just in that simple silence of seeing the other person, and the dog seeing you soul to soul, that really all of that just is washed away. Like it very much seems like that's what happened to you at a very young age. You know, that even wants to have that experience, isn't it? To be truly seen by somebody else and just really seen, and it's enough. And they look at you.
Yeah.
It's
And we're
more powerful
seeking
than
that.
anything.
We're seeking that anyway, aren't we? You know, as human beings, we want to be loved. And you're so right. Like
Mm.
for most of my life, I would have, and it was only through a conversation with somebody that feeling and emotion came up for me. I was actually in a coaching session with somebody for something over here, but really I needed to be working on something over here. But it appeared anyway, as it will, you know, through conversation. But what she had got me to do was to write down a list of words and feelings and emotions. And I couldn't identify it. I didn't know what the feeling was, this feeling that I didn't like or I didn't want to have anymore. So it was like a process of elimination. So all of these words were spilling out onto the table, and they were negative words. You know, they weren't great words for me to be thinking about myself. And then we hit on the word unworthy, and I couldn't speak. I just felt such a lump in my throat. And I was like, oh my gosh, is that what I felt about myself all of my life up to that point? Unworthy. And that was exactly what I felt, was unworthy. And it's taken me years and years and years to, and I still have to work on that, because that was instilled in me, and you know, at a young age. And this is back to the importance of working with our children, because the language
Mm.
we're getting them to use to the dog, they're also hearing those words themselves. They're saying them, they're thinking them, they're becoming a part of them. Aren't they better words to have than unworthy or useless, or you know, whatever word it is for someone? But imagine for any of us to feel unworthy. There's something wrong about that,
You know.
isn't
But
there?
it's I think it's the it seems to be the core of everything else. You can dress it up as something else, but at its core, and it really may, when you just look at our world, like that is what it's sort of saying on some level, you
Yeah,
know. I and I'm sure you felt it. I had to go through that experience with cancer, and because it was a beautiful wake-up call, as hard as it was, because I had always felt unworthy. I didn't understand that. And work and other things were the sort of like it was just this hamster wheel of constantly trying to prove you're worthy through something that isn't permanent and, you know, is going to change. It just doesn't work. We know, you know, doesn't it? It just doesn't. And it seems that the animals and nature, anything to me that is of a natural, you know, is connected to all that is, however you see it,
it's
brings
kind of
us
like the
back.
answer is right under our nose, if
It
only we
is.
opened our eyes and see it. Instead,
Yeah.
we're off searching off, you know, for all of these other things. But you know, it is important for us to, most people, I'd say everybody at some point, but most people have trauma of some sort in their life, don't they? And we're all becoming very aware of that now, and we're talking about it, which is, you know, fantastic. And but it's how we kind of, I suppose, move with that. We can stay stuck in that for a lifetime, and I did for many years. And it's only really in these latter few years that I feel free. And that, there's that word again, freedom. I felt that
Mm,
as a child. I got glimpses of that as a
mm,
child, but it quickly got pushed back time and time again. But we're so blessed when we get to a period in life where we can be thankful, where we
Yeah.
can say that we can experience that freedom now.
And
Um,
how did you find that? How did that come back? Like, how would you credit that you finding that freedom again?
yeah, for me, it was doing a lot of inner work as well. And I think most people that you speak to will say the same thing. It doesn't just disappear, does it? We have to dig deep, and we have to, I suppose, be honest and open up a lot of things. So I that was the changing point for me, actually, was to start going on some courses, some personal development courses. I remember many years ago, I don't know if you ever heard of this. It was when they were the old VECs, they're the ETBs now. They
Mm.
brought out a program. This must have been around 1992 or something crazy like that. It's a lifetime ago now, isn't it? But they had this amazing 6-week program called WOW. And WOW stood for Wider Opportunities for Women. I never forget this program because it was the start of, my transformation, as a person. So they had it over 4 mornings a week. And one morning you would work on maybe it could be communication skills. Then the next morning could be, do you remember Colour Me Beautiful used to be there at
Oh,
the
I
start?
do.
They used
Yeah.
to have a lady come in to do Colour Me Beautiful. But we started loving ourselves again through that for me, that was my experience. I started to love myself probably for the first time in my life, really, if I'm being honest. And then I started creating awareness, and I started to enjoy learning, because again, school was not a good experience for me either. So, we can miss out on so many things in our young life, but that doesn't mean we have to miss out on them forever. So then I became a bit of a learning addict, and I still am a little bit. That's my addiction, that I love to
Well,
learn.
that's the exploring, and yeah, I think that's a big
But it
part of
opens
being
up your
human.
world.
It
Yeah, it opens
does.
up your
Mm.
world. But then, over the latter few years, I kind of delved a little bit deeper, and I've, done some training in NLP, which for me personally has really helped me to know me, to see me, and to understand what
And
kind
in what way? Because I always hear, just out of curiosity, I know
of,
neuro-linguistic programming, and I always hear, I think it's like everything, it depends how you use it and in
yeah,
whose
yeah,
hands it is. And
exactly,
you can use
exactly.
everything for good or for
Yeah.
not so good purposes. It really, I definitely see that it's a scale. But how, because you often hear things about NLP, oh, that isn't great. It's, I don't
I
know,
know.
brainwashing or something.
Yeah, I know.
How has it helped you?
Even the term brainwashing is quite interesting, yeah, and maybe my brain needed to be washed a bit.
I know that's so
Maybe it did, like,
yeah.
really, because
Yes.
for me, it was stuck in all the negative. It was not allowing any of the, other possibilities to come into my life. So yes, I understand that people will have connotations with everything. Going to church, people will have connotations with it. Dressing in a different way, people will, 'cause
Of
that's
course,
like,
yeah.
it's
Your
human
judgment
nature, isn't
around.
it?
Yeah,
So,
so much.
uh,
Yeah.
but it's a practice, and I suppose what I'd say with it is to find someone that you're aligned with, and it's like anything. If you're going to invest in anything, you need to make sure that that match is a good match. If
Yeah.
we go to the wrong network, it can damage us as well. So yeah, but for me, and that is personal, isn't it, Celine? and,
Yeah.
and for
Of
me,
course.
I
Yeah.
know that it has helped me, and it's helped me to help others as well. Like everything, it could be used in a negative, as can any skill that
Yeah.
we get, can be used
Absolutely.
in
Yeah.
a negative. But for me, it was about awareness. So it has brought, and is still bringing me, a lot of awareness, and it just allowed me to open my mind in a way that I hadn't experienced, I suppose, before.
And can I ask you, because it strikes about that, particularly um when we talk about sort of coming to know ourselves and who we truly are, and where we started, and the dog knows, and the inner knowing, and a lot of that, in my experience, is covered up. I mentioned that, through all the systems and the conditioning and the way we grow up, and that the NLP, or what you're describing, is like helping undo a lot of the patterns. There's unconscious patterns that I'm becoming more aware of, aside from anything else. They've just built up in all of us, different types of all sorts. And is that where it's very helpful in sort of
Yeah, for
this
me, it was helping me
unconscious?
recognize those unconscious things,
Mm.
definitely. But
What was the
again,
biggest one, if you wouldn't mind, if it's not too personal to share,
well, I
which
suppose a lot of the biases, understanding a lot of the biases that we take on as we get older, and some of those are from parents and from the people around us, and some of the biases are very much about that need to fit in, even if it's at a cost to us. Like, it's awareness. For me, this is all awareness. So what is our basic, what do we want? We want to be loved. We need to belong. We want to feel that we belong, that people care about us, that we want to feel of value, all of those things. So in NLP, it works through a lot of different biases. And that really kind of woke me up. And there's a phrase that was used that also, there's so many, Celine, that have woke me up. But one phrase that's used is, the map is not the territory.
the map
So
is
the
not.
map we are given, from the people that surround us, be it our parents, the wider circle of friends, just because that's the map we have doesn't mean it's the truth.
Mm,
It doesn't
mm.
mean it's 100% accurate. So what if in that map we're being contained and we're being held into a place because of old beliefs and old patterns? And
I
yeah,
like that.
it's
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
map is not the territory. And
It's back to freedom again, isn't it? Like it just
it
even
comes
as you
back to it a lot, doesn't it? But I
it
suppose it's
does.
what are your values? And for me,
Oh, well, that's number
freedom
one
is
for
a
me.
value. Yeah, freedom is a value. But
Yeah.
but again, it's the teacher that you have is what will make the difference. And a teacher can make or break you. So for me, from an NLP perspective, I can't say enough about my teacher. But in school, from a teacher perspective, one teacher nearly broke me. So that's the power of another individual as well. But it's, I suppose, also being strong enough in ourselves that when something feels off kilter, to recognize that and step away from it.
But isn't that to me, that is the key that we need to be teaching young people and adults, is to trust this. It's like what I was saying, and it goes around, I know that the trauma, and we can get stuck in it and we have to move through, but this is the key to me to getting back. It was for me to getting back in touch with this inner voice, knowing that is your compass. It's your true compass when you find it, because it just has never it has never let me down. Doesn't mean life doesn't have its challenges. So it
Mm.
does seem to be, isn't it, the key to bring us back into that sort of connection with our, like, what feels right for us. I think everybody knows once. It's like you hear the example of walking into a room and you just know you don't feel comfortable. You may not be able to exactly say why, but and every fiber in your being. So we know this sort of brings me back to the animals as well, because the animals see very clearly, don't they? They see
Yeah.
exactly
And
what.
that's the beauty of the animal, isn't it? And if we look at the dog, and as a dog, as I always say, let's look at the dog as a dog. In their world, they don't mess around with this silly, overwinded communication. They communicate very clearly. We can learn from that. Yeah, we can
Yeah.
learn from that. There's so many things that we can learn by just observing, the simplicity of a life that, that the dog leads.
Yeah.
Um,
Can you
but
share just a few more of those? And even some of the, when you talk about, because your work, as you said, and I know even when you say a dog trainer, I heard somebody else who works with animals saying in the new world, let's say, that we're moving into, hopefully, that we are creating in terms of the way we want to live, that pets will be nearly a thing of the past. I'm not saying that all animals roaming wildly, but this idea of training and, how would you see that yourself in an ideal world?
I suppose if we come back to the child and the
Yeah.
dog, it's helping them to see exactly what you're talking about. It's maybe, I suppose, getting them to look at things in a slightly different way. So I was trying to think, I had an example in my head there, and it's just after jumping out as fast as it come into it. It was to do with the dogs. Like if we look at the dogs around trust, around trust, they will trust and they can rebuild trust. And even though sometimes not the best things happen to them, they can get through that with a little bit of love and a little bit of compassion. That wasn't the example I was trying to think of, Celine. I was trying to. Well, you kind of caught me on the hop with that question, because I'm in the process of writing a second book, Celine, right? And I'll give you just. I won't give you too much, but I'll just give you a little glimpse into it. It's kind of really based on what you've just asked me there. That's why I'm probably stalling a little bit.
Okay,
Like, oh,
don't give
okay.
away any big
No,
secrets you don't
no.
want to.
But it's like the life lessons that we can get from our dogs. Okay, and for children, isn't that a beautiful way to teach? It's like we can use the dog as the example and then give the reason why. So a dog is like, friendship means a lot to a dog, just friendship. So we can talk about friendship with the child, and the child understands that. They see a dog as a friend in a very simple, non-judgmental way. Does that make sense?
It
It's like,
does, yeah. Yeah.
um,
It's, you know what, sorry, when you say that, that's actually quite moving to think, because I think we can often I've seen a lot of dogs, I'd say quite lonely, where they're
yeah,
brought
yeah.
out for a walk and home, but they're not getting to socialize even with other
No,
dogs.
no,
And
and that's really what it's about. I suppose if we're getting to the core of the dog nose, it's to, think of the dog. Is there any harm to think of just working with another sentient being as you mentioned earlier? That's a beautiful word, sentience,
mm,
something with
mm,
feeling and
yes.
emotion. And again, I'm not saying to class them all as the same. Like a dog, we sometimes as humans can go too far with our dogs and humanize them, and I don't think that's fair to the dog. I actually don't think that's fair to the dog. And so that's something I work on with children as well. They're not toys. They
Mm,
have feelings and emotions, so they're not toys. And in my first book, which for children, it was to get them thinking about having a dog in our life is about responsibility. So there's lifelong lessons in that. So it is a responsibility to have a dog in our life, because they are not a cuddly teddy bear. That's not what they are. And we need to help our children understand this. And actually, we need to help some adults understand
mm.
this as well, because a lot of dogs are bought for looks, based on looks, or they match. It's nearly like they match my coat, basically. Like, is that
Yeah.
a good enough reason to get a dog that's going to be with you for, possibly 16 years? Is that a good enough reason? To get a puppy because they're cute, but puppies don't stay puppies for very long. And then, there's things like with puppies, there's actually a thing called puppy blues. So after the initial, as I say, rose tinted glasses stage, then you're left with the reality of, what does a puppy do? It toilets, it needs feeding, it cries, it disturbs your life. It's a bind. Having a dog in our life is a bind. So these are all real things that we also need to be considering as well. So in the children's book, it was very much about, think about, is the time right now? Just by saying it's not right now, it doesn't mean not ever. So it's not right
Yes.
now, but not ever. So when would be a better time? When are we going to be home? And who's going to take the dog and, exercise it and walk it? And so we're gently teaching things that are important for life as well. It's transferable skills. So what we teach to work with the dog are transferable skills for later on in life. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. Yeah. I mean, yeah, incredibly. Yeah, everything you say there, and I've seen it with people I know who've got dogs and children and all of the things you talk about. And I've sort of gone through the phase of going, oh, I'd love a dog again. And then, people will say, well, now, are you going to be there for it? Are you going to look after it? And I know that,
Yeah,
it's sort
yeah.
of the motives for getting the dog. It isn't because it would match my coat. It definitely isn't that.
No, no. But that's
But
an
still,
important
no,
point
I
as well.
know. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I
but but
mean, yeah.
but why why do we get dogs? Like, they give us so much, don't they? If,
Mm.
like, I sent out a survey and to people, dog loving people, and it's like, tell me what your dog gives you. And it was just beautiful. It was
What
like,
did people, yeah, what sort of things?
you can imagine, can't you, the feelings
Mm.
that come back? Companionship, someone to listen to me, someone not to judge me, someone to just be there when I need someone I can rely on, or like all of those, like, it's
All of the things we want from each other as human beings,
as
isn't it
human
funny?
beings. Exactly,
Mm.
exactly. Yeah,
And often we may be, and I don't know that that's wrong, but again, it's like, because we're often maybe not getting that in our relationships. And I know there are two ways, it's not all one-sided that we're not getting it. Maybe we're not offering it either. But, all of those things you say are the basic needs that we have,
yeah,
aren't they?
yeah,
After survival and, having a safe home. And it's like in the world that you just, we were talking about a bit, it's that my sense is that animals can bring us back to the, they're not the same as humans, but can bring us back to the truth of who we are, without all of this, all of the layers. Like, that's really for me a big part I see of what is happening, when we talk about the world and this side and that side and the craziness. I think that has to happen. It's come up in so many conversations I have with people, and I firmly believe this is a necessary part of whatever you don't see will just keep going. So we have to see it. It's like in our own lives, isn't it? If there's something we're hiding from ourselves, it will persist until eventually it'll explode. And that's what it feels like to me. And then it's up to us, what choices are we going to make now that we're letting this sort of out? Where do we want to go after?
yeah,
And I think all of the dog has such a beautiful, I think
yeah.
animals have a beautiful role. I don't fully understand it, but I genuinely feel it myself, because I have a much stronger connection with animals than I ever did, because I have a stronger connection with myself, which is sort of what I was saying earlier. If you can't connect with yourself and have that love for yourself, you just can't have it, can't you? Not for others or animals, you
No,
know.
and it's back to relationships. And so there's two things. You were talking there, I'm like, yes, Celine, because
Mm.
we have a relationship with our dog, but what we're learning there is around communication. And so this is coming back to the dog training piece, okay, which kind of irks me a little bit, because really we're people training, okay, we're actually people training,
Yeah.
right? So
The dogs are sitting there laughing, going,
yeah,
they'll finally get it.
yeah,
Someday they'll get it.
but it's also beautiful, because it's a beautiful way of bringing people to realization. So often, like, an example is, I'd be called in because the dog is got all these problems. It's like the dog, the dog, the dog. The problems usually aren't with the dog, it's with the communication from the people. Yeah. So my job, I feel, is to help them understand that in order to get, we expect the dog to come and live in a human world and act in a human way, when it can't. It's a dog, right? It just can't. Okay. But what it can do is learn to live alongside us in our human way, but it still has to be a dog. But we have to learn how to communicate what we want from it in a way that the dog understands. And that isn't by shouting at the dog, or it isn't by saying, Fido, 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 Fido 500 times in a row. The dog doesn't even hear that. It just gets more confused. It doesn't know what's expected of it. It thinks it's in trouble. It doesn't understand what this human is trying to say. But if we learn to understand the mind of the dog, and this is really important to me, is to help people understand why the dog is acting in this way. Okay, it's not because it wants to be a pain in the ass. Dogs don't want that. It's not because it wants to make your life a misery. Dogs don't want that. They just want to have a safe, comfortable place to live in, like we spoke about earlier. But what we need to understand is how they communicate in order for us to communicate to them effectively. Okay, so it has to be in a way that doesn't frighten them, in a way that that they can pick up and grasp and work with. Like, they can learn words or sounds or tones, but they don't have vocabulary in the way that we do. So how could they possibly understand, us barking out orders at them? and we're taking a puppy and it's all rose tinted glasses, and then all of a sudden we're like, well, why are you still peeing on the floor? Why are you still barking here? Why are you still doing that? Because we haven't shown them what we expect from them. We have to teach them that. We shouldn't expect the onus to be on the dog. It should be on us. Are we not meant to be the intelligent breeds here? So it's relationships. But if we can't communicate with a dog, maybe we can't communicate with other humans either.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
very interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
it is. And
Yeah.
for what I find is I've had experience of this, and this isn't in every case. I'm not saying this is in every case, but I might have families coming to work with me and there's conflict with the dog, but there's also conflict within the family. So you see it playing out in a different form. But when they learn to communicate with the dog, or when you kind of have a discussion about, well, the dog isn't understanding this because you're not giving it time to, to work through what you've asked of it. So you're just barking a command and you expect it to understand that. If we bark a command at our child and expect it to understand it, they're not going to understand it. So the same rule applies to the communication we have in our lives as it does with the dog. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. It does totally.
So
Yeah.
is that not a huge skill if we can communicate with an animal that doesn't talk the same language as us? Surely we can communicate better with our own species.
Yeah. And the fact that the dog doesn't play games in the same way, I don't think that a human
The
might.
mind games, no,
Yeah,
no,
it's just
no.
is as it's. What can you even mention, just it'll be very interesting, a particular success story where, particularly with a family or a child and the animal, like what was the learning out of it for them, or what changed? That
Yeah,
might be a nice thing for
yeah.
people to
I said
hear.
like there's so many
I
beautiful
know,
stories. I get it hard to pull one,
I
So
know. Well,
the
one that you feel today just comes
the
to you.
one that always sticks out for me the most, Celine, was working with a family, and it was more about this is communication with the family, I suppose, is what came out of this. So this was a beautiful family, and there was four children and the two parents, and I was called in because child number two was in that teenage year and had always wanted a dog for years and years. And all the emotional blackmail our children put on us when they're looking for anything, but for a dog, it's like, please let me have a dog, please let me. So this had gone on, but the family were great communicators anyway. They really were great communicators. So they weren't being pressured by the child, and they had made a commitment when he reached a certain age, 13, that they would have the discussion again, but not before that, because they explained, that there was responsibility with the dog, and they wanted it to be fair to the dog as well as to the family. So they were really good. They're really
Yeah.
good communicators. So when I went in, it was like 4 steps of the ladder with these children, 4 different ages. So the youngest, she was 4.5, 5, around that age. And then we had like a bigger teenager, and then there was the two boys in between in the middle. So when I went in, we had like a family discussion first, and they told, they shared what they wanted. And it turned out that the eldest child didn't want a dog in the house. And his reasons were he felt as the eldest child, he'd get lumbered with all the jobs, right? The,
Fair
sec-
enough.
the second boy, but it was a fantastic
Yeah,
conversation. It
yeah,
allowed them all to
yeah.
have this conversation because there was a
Mm,
bit of conflict because some wanted the dog and some didn't want the dog.
mm.
So the second child was the one that wanted the dog. He just loved dogs. He was going to do everything with this dog, and our children promise us these things, but they don't have the maturity really to follow through with them up to a certain point. The third child didn't give him monkeys either way. He just wasn't bothered. He's like, I don't mind, I don't care, but I'm not bothered if it doesn't come either. And the fourth child was a little girl, and she was just the brightest little button. And she said to me, Mary, I'd like a dog, but I'm afraid of dogs. So each member of the family had their own perspective on what they wanted or didn't want. But through this conversation, everyone got to hear everybody else's point of view, which hadn't happened before. It was just this sit around. And the beauty is that when I go in, I'm the sort of the neutral person to the parents, and then it doesn't come a fight between the child and the parents, but I can bring the things to the table that the parents are maybe thinking. But it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter if they don't really like me anyway at the end of it all. But the parents are still, they're all still a happy family at the end of it. But at the end of the discussion, they had a week to talk about it and to discuss, and then we came back and we had another chat. And the conversations that they'd had in the home around, being fair to everybody, whose responsibility would it be, um, the cost, everything that came with it, the type of dog, they discussed everything. They just went all out over on this. And then at the end of it, they decided that we set out like a little family agreement, that this was the agreement, that this was the roles people were going to play. And the most of the duties went to the boy who wanted the dog. But this was kind of the basis of it, that it was a whole family discussion that involved everybody, and everybody understood where everyone was coming from. 3 weeks later, they did go and rescue a beautiful dog and took him home, and then they brought him to dog training classes, and they done fantastic work with him. So that's an example from like I suppose a communication perspective. But can I share one more example with you,
Absolutely, yeah.
Celine? This was a little boy. This was way back at the beginning. His mum had approached me. I was running children's dog training classes, and that was all about building confidence for the child with their dog on their own, because quite often parents will take over as well, so the child doesn't get to do it for themselves. But this mother had approached me, and she had a little boy who had autism, but she contacted me because he loved his dog. His dog was his best friend. And when she said his story, I was like, this is my story. Like she's repeating back. So I understood. And she said, is there any possibility you could work with him on a one-to-one, because he can't do a group setting? So we did. We went and we done it was a 6-week program at that time. We done it in his house. And she said he struggles so much in verbalizing in the home and talking about feelings and emotions. But over the period of time with this little dog, he started talking so much more. But he also lacked confidence as well. But at the end of the program with this little boy, he worked on agility with his little dog. So we got a little routine going. And then at the end, if the child wanted to, they could go for like a little badge. We had a little system that if they wanted to, they didn't have to. That was their choice. But he wanted to go for the badge, but he was really, really nervous. But on the day when I went, it was me that ended up nervous, because he was set up in like the back garden, and there was like a little paddock, and all the family and the extended family were lined up around the outside, right? And
God.
me, him,
No
and this
pressure.
little dog went into the middle. And I was like, oh my gosh, please let this dog work with him today. Please, this is so important to him. Him and the little dog were like just magic. They just flowed so beautifully together. But for him to do that in front of such a big audience was just absolutely amazing. And by the end of it, his mother was standing there crying, his auntie was standing there crying, his father was like, just rubbing his eye. And the little boy was just ecstatic. And he went to get his certificate and his badge, and he's like, Mary, can I bring my cousin in? Can I bring my cousin in with me just to get the certificate and badge? And he just stood there. But it was like watching this transformation in this child, the sense of self-belief he had in himself, the pride in his dog. He just adored this little dog. And yeah, like
And oh wow, what a story. Just
it was beautiful to see that. It was
and
beautiful.
was it sounds like just that bond that was created, that that trust between the
And
two of
that
them.
wasn't there when I first went in. And this was down to him. This wasn't down to me. This was down to him, because he listened. And he had to work really hard, because he did have a habit of being a little bit sort of rough with the dog at first, kind of manhandling him. And he in the beginning, so from that emotional level as well, it helps children calm an awful lot. So he would get quite agitated in the beginning if the dog wouldn't perform the trick. Okay, so there was a lot of learning around patience, and again, kindness, trust, understanding. Like they're kind of my key words. Let's build kindness, trust, and understanding, because I think we can create a much more positive world with those elements anyway. But for the mother as well, to see her boy succeeding, to see that change in him. Like it was incredible. I know it sounds like such a little story.
Oh, it
For
doesn't. I'm
them, it
not,
was such a
no.
big
Yeah.
story. It
Yeah.
was, you know,
Imagine how that radiates out in the world. I firmly believe, that shift, it'd be lovely to know, have you seen, or was that a long time ago?
that was a long time ago,
You don't
crikey.
know what
I
happened or
don't
where he is
know. I don't.
now.
Yeah,
And
you see, that's the kind of thing. Like some people will stay in touch with you for years. Like
yeah.
I had a mother coming through with a little girl who wouldn't speak to anybody, and again, you know, the perfect person for walking in the door to me. And she came along with her little dog, and she'd only talk to her dog. And her mother, how that came about was her mother had put an ad into a local Facebook group saying, can anyone please recommend something? She doesn't like sports, she doesn't like this, she doesn't like this. I'm at my wit's end to find something for her. And normally I don't comment in groups like that, but I just felt the need to comment. And so I just put a very brief little message and saying, this may not be of any interest to you at all, but this is happening, you know, starting next week, blah, blah. So she messaged me within seconds and she's like, oh my gosh, Mary, I think this could be it. So she came along the first day with the little girl and she said, can I stay? Because she said she won't stay on her own. And I said, and normally parents didn't stay. And I said, yes, you can stay. And the reason they don't stay is because they tend to take over and not allow the child to fully embrace the experience. Because parents want things to be perfect for their child. Yeah. Life's not perfect. This is something else we need to learn, a little bit of resilience as well. So the first day she stayed for the first half hour. And I said to the little girl, okay, this was the beauty of it as well, Celine. This makes me excited telling this story. So I could see that this little girl was struggling, like really struggling. We had a few other little boys and girls, and they were happy away and, you know, chatting, laughing and giggling and all the usual messing going on. And she just would not lift her head from the floor. You know, she just was head down. That was me. So I could understand that, you know, that kind of really tore at me. So I said, okay. I said, I can see your little dog is finding this a little bit difficult tonight on his first night. I says, can you see him? He's finding it a little bit difficult, isn't he? And she's like, yeah. So
Mm.
everything I said about the dog, I was saying about her. Yeah. So she related to all of that. But her empathy for her little dog was just pouring out of her. So instead, she became my assistant for that session. And we went around and we checked out the other dogs. I said, let's not put your little dog, he doesn't need to be under pressure at all coming to class, does he? And she's like, you know, so halfway through, the mother said, can I go and wait in the car? And I was like, yeah, off you go. Like, so she was my little helper for that day. And at the end, when her mother come back in, she just lifted her little head and she just says, thanks, Mary. Like, it was nothing, but it was
Mm.
everything. Yeah.
Everything.
So
Yeah.
she came for about 3 or 4 terms, that child. And like,
Wow.
she just blossomed. She just
That's
blossomed.
incredible. That's
But she
so,
also
yeah.
learned beautiful skills to work with her dog. You
Yeah.
know, it built that relationship between child and dog as well. So
Yeah, on every level, but it just sounds when you describe, going into the different homes and families and that girl, that how it's almost a sort of a group therapy, it's a therapeutic session as
yeah,
well,
yeah,
really, for the
yeah,
family,
yeah.
isn't it, in a very non-threatening way. Even you could see it, in relationships, whether it's a husband or wife or any relationship, because, they're showing you really the truth in a very, it's in a
And that is
non-threatening.
the beauty of it. And I love getting couples coming in with their dogs, Celine. I
Oh,
love
wow,
that
that could
because,
be.
but it is like it is. And but for them as well, it's a place of realization because you can have two very different personalities in a relationship. So when those two different personalities are trying to get the same thing out of this dog, it's not going to work because the dog is just going to be really, really confused. But also, if you think about it, it probably isn't working too well in the relationship either because there's this kind of clash thing going on, yeah. So it's a lovely opportunity to get people to talk about what's happening with the communication, you know. So like I can ask, well, why do you think that the dog is not responding? And it's so funny because so often they just look at each other and laugh and say, well, I wouldn't respond if you spoke to me like that. So it all starts coming out. So it nearly turns into a therapy
I
session
know, but
sometimes.
it
It
sounds
really
like a
does.
really good
But
way to do
yeah,
therapy
it's great.
without
Yeah, it's
the
great.
finger. I can just hear someone going, the dog isn't listening to me. And
Yeah,
you
yeah.
don't listen to me.
Well, that's what happens. Like, it's very funny. And then, but people just laugh at themselves. They realize what's happening themselves, but it opens up conversation again. So it's back to,
Wow.
I say that on the website, communication is key. To get the best out of our dog, communication is key. To get the best out of ourselves, communication
Communication
is
is
key.
key. And it does require, doesn't it, a certain amount of vulnerability because to communicate, you have to communicate whereas the dog will show us their needs. Often sometimes we don't,
Ah,
because,
it's
you
harder
know,
for us, isn't it?
it
It's
is
harder.
harder for us, but I get what you say with the dog nose. The dogs are probably having little get-togethers down in the park going, oh, are they getting it in
I
your
would
house
love to know
yet?
what they're thinking sometimes. It's
I
like,
know.
God, these
I
two
always think I don't have children, but I do believe children are our teachers, and I think animals are our teachers
yeah,
because we have sort of, as many great we are in many ways, but we have gone sometimes so far away from who we truly are because of what we said earlier, all of the
yeah.
just the programming or whatever word conditioning you want to use, just that's in our world, which hopefully I feel is changing, and the dog is helping us in that as well.
And we can help each other,
Oh,
can't
we
we?
can help each
It's like
other.
a
Exactly.
two-way thing, which
It's
is
all, isn't it? It's
fantastic.
always two-way, in every situation, isn't it? I feel that every time I do the podcast, it's such a two-way. I think and hopefully it goes multi-way with all the listeners. I know you've a book, Mary, that you have written. Sorry, I wanted to mention that before we go, as well as you have a new book you will
Yeah, so
be
I've just
releasing.
started. Yeah, so my first
Okay.
book was for children, obviously, and the
Yeah.
second book is going to be aimed more at adults. But it's more about just some of the things we kind of touched on a little bit.
I know, which are wonderful. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just a
head of
topic to,
thinking.
yeah, yeah. So for people who want to get your first book or get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, so well, I'm on social media, obviously. So I'm come up under the dog knows why actually on social media
God
because
knows
yeah, so
why.
that works as well. The dog knows why, the dog knows, and the dog knows why. The children's book is called The Dog Knows Do You. So the dog knows do you, and it's really an interactive journal for children and the family to sit down together. But it gets the child to look at the time that they're getting the dog, the type of dog that's best suited for them. It gives them some activities to do. There's some different little tasks in there. It's very interactive, and there's been beautiful feedback on that little book as well. So in Ireland it can be bought on buythebook.ie.
Oh, yes, yes.
Buythebook.ie. So it's on Amazon as well, but it's much easier to get the Irish one. It's on Amazon.com, which can be a little bit difficult for Ireland.
Yeah.
Buythebook.ie is where I'd go for that. And if anyone has any questions at all, I'm always happy to have a chat as well. I just love
Yeah,
to.
thank you. It's so interesting. Like, I just think of like when you say about communication, and there's so much miscommunication, isn't there? And you can see even when I had a dog when we're younger, exactly what you say, and you're struggling to try and why won't the dog do it? And you just see it's like this. It's not being understood. There is a miscommunication, and it's not for want of people are
I'm
trying to do
smiling
them.
at you saying that, Celine. I deliver a few programs to the ETBs, and at the moment now, I'm actually delivering a dog relevant program to. I actually work quite a lot with disability groups, adults with learning disabilities. So we were doing a dog. So equally, staying safe around a dog and understanding how to read a dog's body language. But I was talking with a group yesterday, and one of the guys in the group said to me, "It's all about miscommunication, Mary, miscommunication." And you know something? He was spot on. He was just spot on with what he said. Uh, but it's interesting. What I found with the dog nose is that I'm evolving with it as well. And at the minute, I'm kind of sitting in a quiet space because I feel it's changing slightly now. I feel there's more, as I said, it's not really, I do dog training, but it's deeper than dog training. So I have a message that I want to share. So I'm working on that now. And I'm going to start that with schools. So I'm going to be delivering like a 6-week program to schools with children as well. I think it's a great place to start life lessons. And
Yes.
yeah, so I just need to sit quiet in that space, because I feel it's about us. We spoke about this earlier, speaking our truth, and not being afraid to do that. And we will reach the right people. We're never, no one is ever for everyone.
Yeah.
So we need to find the people that need the message that we have, or who are looking for that message, and connect with those. And thank you so much, Celine, as well. It's your podcast is very special, because it allows people to speak their truth, which is really, really important. So I
Well,
appreciate that.
oh, and thank you. And you remind me when you say that, because I remember as a child not feeling like I had a voice. And I can remember, you've just reminded me there, being sent to elocution. I don't know if it even exists now. Have you ever heard of elocution? And I remember asking my mother when I was, why did you send me? And I have a brother and sister. And she said, when you did speak, we couldn't, well, she wouldn't say that now, but she did say it to me before. We
Yeah,
couldn't understand you because you were speaking so fast, because it was either nothing or no, you let the
all came
plug go
gushing
and then
out.
it all came out. So
Yeah,
yeah, I have it's a really wonderful opportunity for me to use my voice, but also to let others use their voice. That is what I hope I do, because, like you said, not everybody is. And a woman said this to me the other, because it's like I'm back at school. I keep saying that in the podcast. This is school for me. I'm learning from every guest like you every day. It's such a privilege. And this woman said to me, she said, we each, are a frequency, we're energy, a vibration, whatever words you want to use. And it's like a radio station. So you have to transmit by speaking, you have to transmit so the people can see where you are. Like, they can't find you if you're not speaking, if you're not. And I thought it was a beautiful way, the way she put it. It's about that, so we can find the people that we're meant to work with. And because we all have different roles, don't we, in this world, and this is how we find each other. And when you find the right people, like you described before we came on air, and this connection you had with this woman, something just very quickly can happen. It just like can be in a split second, and maybe you've created something new, and then that changes someone else's life, and it ripples out, doesn't it?
it sure
This is
does.
the
And
way
we
we're
all
meant to
have
live.
that. We all have that ability to create that ripple,
We
uh,
do,
which
we
which is
do.
beautiful. But we have to do what you said. We have to be brave enough sometimes to step out and speak out, and that can be difficult and it can be a challenge. But when we do, and we're aligned with speaking our truth, then we feel very fulfilled and we feel very free.
Yeah. That's what it's about, isn't it? Freedom and permission, giving permission, hopefully invites others to claim their freedom too, as well. So that's a beautiful note to finish on. Thank you so much, Mary. I'm going to put all of your contact details in the description box. And to everyone listening, I'm sure you enjoyed and got as much from this conversation as I did. And please reach out to Mary. It's obviously, is it primarily you work with people? I know you deliver programs in person, or are there things that you do on Zoom, maybe educationally, for people who might have pets
Yeah,
or?
yeah, I'm going to be bringing more of an online element as well in the new year. So I work via Zoom as well, whatever works for people.
Okay,
Obviously, from a distance perspective, we can only travel so far. But I also deliver some webinars as well, so they will all be coming up. So if people just want to get an insight into the mind of the dog, that will
brilliant,
change your whole relationship with your animal anyway. So that alone
brilliant.
is worth doing. So yeah, keep an eye out for that coming soon.
Okay, that's beautiful. A nice introduction as well, maybe for someone who just wants to take the first step. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Until the next time, such a pleasure. Take care.